Have you ever wondered where the real power in our world comes from? Forget the crowns and the castles for a moment. The true story of power, the one that shaped our modern world, wasn't written by kings, but by merchants. Let's journey back in time, to a world where trade was just beginning to connect distant lands. This is the story of the merchants of power. Imagine a world without global markets, without stock exchanges, without even a single unified currency. In this era, long before what we call the dawn of capitalism, a new kind of power was stirring. It wasn't forged in battle, but in the bustling marketplaces and on the dusty trade routes that crisscross the known world. This is where our story begins, with the rise of the first merchant guilds. These weren't just simple shopkeepers. They were organized, ambitious, and incredibly smart. A lone merchant was vulnerable, an easy target for bandits on the road or whimsical lords demanding outrageous taxes. But together, they were a force to be reckoned with. They formed guilds, powerful brotherhoods that protected their members, set standards for quality, and, most importantly, began to control the flow of goods. Think about it. Spices from the Far East, silks from Cathay, salt from distant mines. These weren't just products, they were symbols of wealth and status. And who controlled them? The guilds. They quickly learned a fundamental lesson of economics: the power of scarcity. By controlling the supply of a sought-after commodity, they could dictate its price. If a nobleman wanted pepper for his feast, he had to pay what the guild demanded. This was a revolutionary idea. They were, in essence, inventing the principles of supply and demand, centuries before economists would give them a name. This wasn't just about getting rich. It was about fundamentally changing the power structure. For centuries, power was tied to land. The more land a lord owned, the more powerful he was. But the merchants were creating a new kind of wealth, liquid wealth. Gold, silver, and credit that could be moved, invested, and multiplied. A lord's wealth was stuck in his fields, but a merchant's wealth traveled with him on his ships and caravans. Let's look at the Hanseatic League in Northern Europe. This wasn't just a guild, it was a confederation of merchant guilds and market towns that dominated trade across the Baltic and North Seas for centuries. They had their own armies, their own navies, and their own laws. They could wage war, sign treaties, and bring entire kingdoms to their knees simply by imposing a trade embargo. They were a state within a state, a testament to the raw power that organized trade could command. Or consider the great Italian city-states like Venice and Genoa. Their power wasn't built on vast farmlands but on their fleets of trading ships. The Venetians became masters of the Mediterranean, their merchants acting as the middlemen between Europe and the riches of the East. They financed crusades, toppled empires, and built a city of impossible beauty on the foundations of commerce. The Doge of Venice might have looked like a king, but his power was derived entirely from the city's commercial success. This new merchant class began to operate on a different level. While feudal lords were busy with petty squabbles over territory, the merchants were thinking globally. They were establishing trading posts in foreign lands, creating complex networks of credit and finance, and underwriting voyages of discovery. They weren't just reacting to the world, they were actively shaping it to serve their interests. They were the original venture capitalists, funding the very expeditions that would discover new continents and create the first global economy. So, how did this lead to the rise of kings as we know them? It's a fascinating paradox. Initially, these powerful merchants were a challenge to the old feudal order, but ambitious local rulers saw an opportunity. A lord might have an army, but armies are expensive. They need to be paid, fed, and equipped. Where did the money come from? It came from the merchants. A clever ruler realized that instead of fighting the merchants, he could partner with them. He could offer them protection, standardize weights and measures, build better roads and ports, and create a single, stable currency. In return, the merchants would pay taxes and provide loans. This symbiotic relationship was a game changer. The king got the funds he needed to consolidate his power, build a professional army loyal only to him, and subdue his rival nobles. The merchants got a stable and predictable environment in which to conduct their business, expanding their markets under the king's protection. Essentially, trade gave birth to the modern state. The fragmented patchwork of feudal domains began to coalesce into centralized kingdoms, not just through conquest, but through commerce. The king's power was no longer just based on divine right or land ownership. It was now underwritten by the economic engine of the merchants. The merchants had learned to manipulate scarcity, and in doing so, they had created a system where wealth, and therefore power, could be concentrated in the hands of a central authority they could influence and do business with. So, the next time you see a picture of a magnificent old king in his robes and crown, remember the unseen figures standing in the shadows, the merchants, the ones who financed his armies, filled his treasury, and built the economic foundations of his kingdom. They understood a timeless truth, that controlling the flow of goods is controlling the flow of power. They were the original merchants of power, and the world they created is, in many ways, the world we still live in today. Thanks for joining me on this journey through history. If you found this as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about the hidden forces that have shaped our world. Let me know in the comments what you think. See you next time.